The rain-slicked streets of Seattle glistened under the sodium glow of streetlights as the city's tech elite gathered inside the gleaming fortress of Vanguard Technologies. Nestled in the heart of the Fremont district, the company's innovation hub was a cathedral of glass and steel, its 50-foot windows reflecting the restless energy of a city that never slept. Inside, the air was sharp with the scent of ionized air and the faint hum of supercomputers. But the mood was anything but serene. The Elysium engine, a $3 billion marvel meant to deliver clean, limitless energy to entire continents, sat silent at the center of the lab, a polished monument to ambition and failure. For 8 grueling weeks, it had defied the best minds in the world, refusing to run for more than 120 seconds before shuddering to a halt with a high-pitched wail and a cryptic error message. Harmonic collapse detected. Alexander Kane, the billionaire CEO of Vanguard, paced the pristine white floor, his custom Italian loafers clicking like a metronome. At 58, Alex was a man carved from ambition with piercing gray eyes and a presence that could silence a room. His empire, built from a single software startup in the 90s, had reshaped industries, crushed competitors, and earned him a fortune that rivaled small nations. But the Elysium engine was his white whale, the key to the Horizon Initiative, a secretive partnership with the Department of Energy that promised to redefine global power. And it was failing. Spectacularly. The lab was a pressure cooker. A dozen engineers, each with degrees from MIT, Stanford, or Caltech, stood in a nervous semicircle around the engine. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. They had tried everything, rewriting millions of lines of code, swapping out every component, even consulting a Nobel laureate in material science who had flown in from Boston. Nothing worked. The engine would roar to life, its sleek titanium and cobalt alloy frame vibrating with promise only to choke and die at the 120-second mark. The error message was always the same, a taunting riddle, harmonic collapse detected. The lead engineer, Dr. Samuel Carter, a wiry man with a PhD from Berkeley and a nervous tic, wiped sweat from his brow. "Sir, we've recalibrated the thermal sensors and rerouted the power grid again," he said, his voice tight. "The collapse is instantaneous, like a feedback loop we can't trace. We're exploring new resonance models," but Alex cut him off, his voice low and venomous. 8 weeks, Carter. 8 weeks, $30 million in overtime, and you're still exploring. I have senators breathing down my neck, the DOE threatening to pull funding, and you're giving me models. The engineers flinched, their silence a confession of defeat. Alex stopped pacing, his gaze sweeping the room like a predator seeking prey. This engine is the future of Vanguard. It's the future of energy. And you're telling me my future is a $3 billion paperweight. The lab was vast, its high ceilings and open design meant to inspire innovation, but now it felt like a tomb. Sunlight filtered through the towering windows, glinting off the Elysium engine's curves. But the beauty only mocked the team's futility. They had torn apart every circuit, every bolt, every line of code. They had run simulations until the servers overheated. The problem wasn't in the design, it was perfect on paper. It wasn't in the materials, every component was custom forged, tested to withstand stresses beyond imagination. Yet the 120-second curse held fast, a silent mockery of their expertise. Alex's temper, legendary in boardrooms and newsrooms alike, was a storm brewing. "You're the best, aren't you?" he snapped, his voice rising. "The brightest minds money can buy. And you're outsmarted by a machine. Maybe I should fire you all and hire a team of high schoolers. At least they'd be cheaper." The engineers shifted uncomfortably, their exhaustion palpable. Dr. Carter tried again, his voice pleading, "Sir, we're close. The data suggests a micro-oscillation in the core, but our sensors can't pinpoint it. We need more time." Alex laughed, a cold, bitter sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Time? You want time. The DOE wants results. The world wants results. And I want my engine." His gaze landed on a figure in the corner, nearly invisible amidst the chaos. Maria Delgado, a janitor in a faded navy uniform, moved quietly, wiping down a stainless steel counter with methodical precision. For 3 years she had cleaned the labs at Vanguard, a ghost in a world of titans. Her hands, calloused from years of work, moved with the rhythm of survival. Maria was 42, a single mother, with a life defined by struggle. Her mother, Elena, was battling a rare autoimmune disease, and the medical bills were a relentless tide drowning her in debt. She worked double shifts, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans to cover the cost of treatments that seemed to help less with each passing month. Her world was not one of billion-dollar engines or corporate empires. It was a world of hospital waiting rooms, collection notices, and the constant fear that she might not be there for her son, Lucas. She kept her head down, avoiding the eyes of the engineers and their billionaire boss. But Alex, his frustration boiling over, needed a target. His eyes narrowed on Maria, and a cruel spark ignited in his mind. "You!" he barked, pointing a manicured finger at her. Maria froze her rag, hovering over the counter. The room turned to stare, the air thick with unease. "What's your name?" Maria's heart raced, her cheeks flushing with shame. "Maria Delgado, sir," she said softly, her voice barely audible. Alex strode toward her, his shoes clicking ominously. "Maria, you've been here every night, haven't you? Listening to these geniuses fail. Tell me, what do you think of our little problem?" His tone was mocking a blade wrapped in silk. Maria's mind scrambled. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. I don't know, sir. I just clean." Alex's smile was predatory. "Of course you do, but let's play a game. Let's pretend you're not just a janitor. Let's pretend you have the answer to my $3 billion problem." He turned to his engineers, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe we've been overcomplicating things. Maybe we don't need PhDs or Nobel laureates. Maybe all we need is a mop and a fresh perspective. What do you say, Dr. Carter? Should we let the cleaning lady take a crack at it?" The engineers shifted, some suppressing nervous laughter, others staring at the floor in discomfort. Maria felt small, exposed, her dignity stripped bare in front of strangers. "That's ridiculous, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling. Alex leaned closer, his voice a conspiratorial hiss. "Ridiculous. You know what's ridiculous. Spending $30 million to get nowhere. At least your idea would be free." He straightened, his voice booming. "Here's my offer, Maria, in front of all these witnesses. Fix the Elysium engine, and I'll give you $150 million. A gasp rippled through the room. The number was absurd, a theatrical flourish meant to humiliate. "Fix my engine." Maria, Alex continued, savoring the moment. "And $150 million is yours. Fail, and you're out. Not just from this lab, but from every cleaning job in Seattle. I'll make sure of it." Maria's knees buckled, her vision blurring with tears. The weight of her mother's medical bills, her son's future, her fragile existence pressed down on her. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "I can't," she stammered, her voice breaking. "Of course you can't," Alex said, waving a dismissive hand. "Now, get back to your mop. At least you're good at that." He turned, ready to unleash another tirade on his team, the spectacle over. but a small, steady voice cut through the air like a blade. "My mom can't, but I can." Every head swiveled toward the lab's entrance. Standing there was Lucas Delgado, an 11-year-old boy with dark hair and intense brown eyes clutching a worn backpack. He wore a faded hoodie and sneakers with fraying laces, his small frame dwarfed by the towering lab. He had been waiting for his mother to finish her shift, sitting quietly by the door with a math book and a dream of becoming an engineer. Lucas looked straight at Alex, his gaze unwavering, a quiet fire burning in his eyes. The engineers stared, mouths agape. Alex turned slowly, his face a mask of astonishment. For a moment, the lab was silent. The only sound the faint hum of the ventilation system. Then Alex laughed, a harsh, booming sound that echoed off the walls. "Well, this is rich," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "First, the janitor, now her kid. What's next? The family dog." He stepped toward Lucas, his amusement laced with cruelty. "Tell me, kid, are you going to fix my engine with a toy wrench?" Lucas didn't flinch. "No, sir," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I'm going to fix it by listening to it." The laughter died in Alex's throat. He looked at the boy, then at Maria, who stood frozen, her face pale with fear. The engineers exchanged glances, their skepticism warring with curiosity. Alex's smile returned, but it was colder, sharper. "You know what I like your guts, kid. The offer stands. $150 million if you succeed. Fail, and you and your mom are done." Maria rushed forward, grabbing Lucas's arm. "No, Lucas, please. This isn't your fight. Let's go home." But Lucas gently pulled away, his eyes fixed on the Elysium engine. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly. "Grandpa Juan taught me how to listen to machines. He said they always tell you what's wrong if you're quiet enough." Near the back of the room, Dr. Clara Nguyen, a materials scientist and observer from the Department of Energy, leaned forward. She was in her early 40s with sharp features and a reputation for cutting through corporate nonsense. She had been silent watching Alex's theatrics with a mix of disdain and detachment. But something in Lucas's voice, the calm certainty, the absence of fear, made her step closer. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice crisp, "if this absurd test is to proceed, I'll oversee it as an impartial adjudicator. This will be documented as a scientific experiment, not a circus." Alex waved a hand still caught in his own drama. "Fine, document it. Put it on the company feed. Let everyone see what happens when a kid thinks he's smarter than my engineers." He turned to Lucas, his voice dripping with mockery. "Go ahead, little genius. Show us what you've got." Maria clutched her son's hand, her heart pounding. She saw the desperation in her own life reflected in this moment. The hospital bills, the late-night worries, the fear of losing everything. But Lucas wasn't looking at her fear. He was looking at the engine, its sleek surface gleaming under the lab's lights. To the engineers, it was a puzzle of code and physics. To Alex, it was a symbol of his legacy. To Lucas, it was something else entirely, a living thing, whispering its pain. He approached the engine, his small hand brushing its cool surface. He closed his eyes just as his grandfather had taught him and began to listen. In that moment, the lab, the billionaire, the engineers, the weight of $150 million, all of it faded. There was only Lucas and the machine. And the secret it was ready to share. The Vanguard Technologies lab in Seattle thrummed with a tense electric silence as Lucas Delgado stood before the Elysium engine, his small hand still resting on its polished titanium surface. The towering machine, a $3 billion testament to human ambition, loomed over the 11-year-old like a silent giant, its sleek curves glinting under the lab's harsh fluorescent lights. The air was heavy with the scent of ozone and the faint metallic tang of overheated circuits. The engineers, a dozen men and women with credentials that read like a who's who of academia, stood frozen, their eyes darting between the boy, their billionaire boss, Alexander Kane, and the gleaming engine that had mocked their expertise for weeks. Maria Delgado, Lucas's mother, clutched her cleaning rag, her knuckles white, her heart a frantic drumbeat of fear and hope. She wanted to pull her son away to shield him from this impossible stage, but his calm, steady gaze held her back. Lucas wasn't just a child in this moment. He was something else, something unshakable, carrying the weight of lessons learned in a dusty garage, under the guidance of his grandfather, Juan Delgado, a mechanic whose hands could coax life from broken machines. Alexander Kane, his tailored suit as sharp as his temper, leaned against a console, his arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. He was a man who thrived on control, who had built an empire by bending the world to his will. And now he was indulging in a cruel game. The $150 million bet he'd made with Maria, now extended to her son, was a theatrical flourish, a way to shame his failing engineers by pitting them against a child. Yet there was a flicker of unease in his gray eyes. Lucas's quiet confidence, the way he touched the engine as if it were a living thing, unsettled him. "Well, kid Alex," said his voice dripping with mockery, "you said you'd listen to it."
So, what's the engine telling you? Got a magic fix for my $3 billion headache?
Lucas didn't respond immediately. His eyes were closed, his brow furrowed, as if he were tuning out the world. The engineers shifted uncomfortably, some suppressing snickers, others exchanging glances of pity. They were used to data streams, algorithms, and precision instruments, not a child playing mechanic with nothing but his hands and ears. Dr. Clara Nguyen, the Department of Energy observer, stood apart from the group, her sharp eyes fixed on Lucas. Unlike the others, she didn't dismiss him. Clara had spent years evaluating cutting-edge projects from fusion reactors to quantum computers, and she knew genius didn't always wear a lab coat. There was something in Lucas's posture, the way he tilted his head, the deliberate gentleness of his touch, that reminded her of a violinist tuning an instrument. She stepped closer, her tablet clutched tightly, ready to document whatever happened next. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice cutting through the whispers, "I suggest we let the boy proceed without interruption. If this is to be a legitimate test, we need focus, not theatrics." Alex waved a hand dismissively. "Fine, Nguyen. Let's see what the kid's got. But I'm not holding my breath." He gestured to Dr. Samuel Carter, the lead engineer who stood rigid at the control panel. "Carter, fire it up. Let's see if our little prodigy can hear something we've missed." Lucas opened his eyes and turned to Dr. Carter. "Can you run it for just 10 seconds?" he asked, his voice small but clear. "And keep everyone quiet, please." Carter hesitated, glancing at Alex, who gave a sharp nod. The engineer's fingers hovered over the controls, his face a mask of skepticism. He felt absurd following the instructions of an 11-year-old in a room full of PhDs. But he pressed the button, and the Elysium engine roared to life. The sound was immense, a deep, resonant growl that filled the lab, shaking the floor beneath their feet. The engineers tensed, their eyes flicking to the digital timer on the wall, already counting down the seconds to the inevitable failure at 120. But Lucas wasn't listening to the roar. He pressed both hands against the engine's casing, his fingers spread wide as if he could feel its pulse. His grandfather Juan had taught him this, how to find the hidden notes beneath the noise, the subtle vibrations that betrayed a machine's pain. Every machine has a heartbeat, Juan used to say, his weathered hands guiding Lucas's over an old tractor engine. You don't just hear it. You feel it. It's like a song, and when it's sick, the song goes wrong. The engine's roar was deafening, but Lucas filtered it out. He focused on a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a secondary vibration that didn't match the engine's primary rhythm. It was like a skipped heartbeat, a discord in the machine's song. He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing, tracking the sensation as it traveled through the metal. "Turn it off," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the noise. Carter complied, and the engine spun down its roar, fading into a soft hum, then silence. The timer read 9.8 seconds. The engineers exchanged confused looks. "What was that?" Alex demanded, stepping forward, his patience thinning. "Did you hear the secrets of the universe in 10 seconds? Kid?" Lucas ignored the sarcasm. He turned to Dr. Nguyen, who was watching him with an intensity that matched his own. "There's a second vibration," he said. "It's small, like a hum under the big noise. It's not in sync with the engine. It's coming from the middle where the power feeds in." Dr. Nguyen's eyes flicked to a nearby monitor displaying real-time vibrational data. She tapped the screen, pulling up a graph of the engine's harmonic profile. "Dr. Carter, your sensors are the best in the industry. They should have caught any secondary vibration," she said, her tone neutral but probing. Carter shook his head, gesturing to the monitor. "Impossible. Our sensors can detect a pin dropping in a storm. Look at the data clean until the 110-second mark, then the collapse begins. There's no secondary vibration." Lucas stepped closer to the engine, his hand trailing along its surface, searching for the source. "Your sensors are looking for a big wave," he said simply. "This is a whisper. It's too small for them." The room went quiet. The engineers stared, their skepticism wavering. Carter's face reddened, his professional pride stung. "Young man, with all due respect, this engine is monitored by equipment that costs more than a house. If there was a vibration, we'd see it." Dr. Nguyen raised a hand, silencing Carter. "Let's test it," she said. "Lucas, where exactly do you feel this vibration?" Lucas pointed to a section near the engine's core where a cluster of thick silver cables connected to a circular housing. "It's in there," he said. "Deep inside, where the power goes to the rotor." The engineers exchanged glances. That was the primary rotor assembly, a sealed unit forged from a proprietary cobalt-titanium alloy. It was the heart of the Elysium engine, designed to withstand temperatures and pressures that would melt steel. They had run countless diagnostics on it, and every test came back clean. "That's the most robust component in the system," Carter said, his voice tight. "We've X-rayed it, stress-tested it. It's flawless." Lucas shook his head, his expression calm but certain. "It's not flawless. It's singing wrong." Maria, standing at the edge of the room, felt her stomach twist. She wanted to believe in her son, but the weight of the moment was crushing. She saw the hospital bills piling up on her kitchen table, the endless calls from debt collectors, her mother's frail hands trembling in the hospital bed. Lucas was her miracle, her reason to keep going, but he was just a boy. How could he stand against a room full of experts, against a man like Alex Kane, who could ruin their lives with a single phone call? She stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Lucas, please, you don't have to do this. Let's just go home." But Lucas turned to her, his brown eyes filled with a quiet strength. "It's okay, Mom. Grandpa Juan said machines don't lie. You just have to listen right." Dr. Nguyen, sensing a shift in the room, walked to a secondary console and pulled up the raw acoustic data from the lab's sensors. "Run it again," she said to Carter. "But this time I want complete silence. No talking, no movement. Alex sighed dramatically but nodded. Fine. Let's humor the kid. Carter, do it. The engine roared to life again, its sound filling the lab like a thunderstorm. Lucas didn't touch the engine this time. He stood a few feet away, his eyes closed, his head tilted slightly. Juan had trained him to hear beyond the obvious, to pick out the smallest sounds in a cacophony. In their garage, he'd made Lucas identify the clink of a dropped screw versus a bolt, the hum of a loose bearing versus a tight one. Now Lucas listened for the engine's hidden voice, and there it was, a faint high-pitched ping, like the tap of a glass rod buried under the roar. It came at the 5-second mark so subtle, it was almost lost in the engine's thunder. "Stop it," Lucas said, his eyes snapping open. The engine shut down the timer, reading 6.2 seconds. "Did you hear it?" he asked, looking at Dr. Nguyen. The engineers shook their heads, hearing only the familiar roar. But Nguyen was already at her console, zooming in on the acoustic waveform. "There," she said, pointing to a tiny spike on the graph, a blip so small it was barely distinguishable from background noise. A high-frequency event at 5.1 seconds, lasting 0.2 seconds. The software flagged it as insignificant, but it's there. The room fell silent, the engineers staring at the screen in stunned disbelief. A child with no instruments had detected something their multi-million-dollar systems had dismissed. Alex's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of unease. "You're telling me that's the problem?" he asked, his voice low. "A sound you can barely see on a graph." "It's not just a sound," Lucas said, his voice steady. "It's a vibration. It's coming from the rotor bearing. There's something wrong with the metal." Carter stepped forward, his skepticism hardening. "That's impossible. The bearing is a single-piece alloy forged in Japan. It's been tested to withstand 10,000 psi. There's no defect." Lucas looked at him, undaunted. "Grandpa Juan said new metals get sick in new ways. He worked on ships in the Navy. He said when they started using new alloys, the engines would fail because the metal remembered how it was made." The engineers stared, their minds racing to process the boy's words. Carter opened his mouth to argue, but stopped, his eyes flicking to the monitor. The spike was real, undeniable. Dr. Nguyen turned to Lucas, her expression a mix of curiosity and respect. "What do you mean, remembered how it was made?" Lucas thought for a moment, recalling Juan's lessons. He said, when metal is forged, it gets stressed. If it's cooled too fast or pressed too hard, it holds on to that stress like a memory. It's fine until you push it, and then it starts to break just a little at first. That's what the ping is, the metal breaking just a tiny bit. Nguyen's eyes widened. She pulled up a file on her tablet, a technical report on the cobalt titanium alloy used in the rotor bearing. "This alloy was developed specifically for the Elysium engine," she said, scanning the document. "It's designed for extreme conditions, but the report mentions a new forging process, high-pressure, rapid cooling to increase density. If there's a residual stress fracture, it could create a micro-fissure under load." The engineers murmured their skepticism, giving way to a dawning realization. Carter shook his head, but his voice was less certain. "A micro-fissure. Our scans would have caught that." Lucas pointed to the bearing housing. "It's too small for your scans. It's like a crack in a glass you can't see until you tap it. When the engine runs, the vibration makes it sing." Nguyen nodded, her mind racing. "We need to isolate that bearing." "Lucas, can you pinpoint the exact spot?" Lucas walked around the engine, his hand trailing lightly over the casing. He stopped at a point just above the rotor assembly where a series of bolts secured the bearing housing. "Here," he said. "The ping is loudest here." Alex, who had been silent, stepped forward, his face unreadable. "You're saying A $3 billion engine is failing because of a crack you can't even see." His voice was a mix of disbelief and curiosity. Lucas nodded. "Yes, sir. It's small, but it's growing. Every time the engine runs, it gets a little bigger, and the vibration gets worse." Alex stared at the boy, then at the engine, then at Nguyen. "Prove it," he said, his voice a low growl. "Carter, get your tools. We're taking that bearing apart." Carter hesitated, his face pale. "Sir, disassembling the rotor housing voids the manufacturer's warranty. The Japanese will charge us millions to recertify it." Alex's eyes didn't leave Lucas. "I don't care. I want to know if this kid's right. Do it." The engineers moved quickly, retrieving a set of precision tools from a foam-lined case. Carter, his hands trembling slightly, positioned a torque wrench over one of the bolts. The room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the ventilation system. Maria watched, her heart pounding, torn between pride and terror. Lucas stood calmly, his eyes fixed on the engine. Nguyen activated a fiber-optic camera, its feed displayed on a large monitor. As Carter loosened the first bolt, the lab held its breath. This was no longer a game. It was a test of truth, and the boy who had walked into the lab with nothing but a backpack and a dream was about to rewrite the rules of what was possible. The Vanguard Technologies lab in Seattle was a crucible of anticipation, the air thick with the weight of an impossible moment. The Elysium engine, a $3 billion masterpiece of engineering, stood at the center of the room, its titanium curves catching the sterile light like a dormant deity. The digital timer on the wall glowed red, a silent judge over the scene unfolding below. Lucas Delgado, an 11-year-old boy with a faded hoodie and the unyielding confidence of his grandfather's teachings, stood beside the engine, his small frame dwarfed by its grandeur. His mother, Maria Delgado, gripped the edge of a console, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mix of dread and burgeoning pride. The engineers, led by Dr. Samuel Carter, hovered around the rotor bearing housing, their tools gleaming under the lab's harsh lights. They were no longer just following orders. They were witnesses to something extraordinary, a moment that could redefine their understanding of genius. Alexander Kane, the billionaire CEO whose empire rested on the success of this engine, stood with his arms crossed, his gray eyes fixed on Lucas. The smirk that had defined his earlier mockery was gone, replaced by a tense curiosity that bordered on unease. Dr. Clara Nguyen, the Department of Energy observer, stood at a monitor, her tablet in hand, documenting every second of this improbable experiment. The room was silent save for the faint hum of the ventilation system and the soft clink of tools as the engineers prepared to test Lucas's theory. Lucas had pinpointed a faint high-pitched ping, a vibration so subtle it had eluded the lab's state-of-the-art sensors. He claimed it came from a micro-fissure in the rotor bearing a flaw born from the stress of the engine's exotic cobalt-titanium alloy. His solution, inspired by his grandfather Juan Delgado's lessons, was radical: a thin silver washer softer than the surrounding metal to act as a damper, absorbing the destructive vibration before it could cascade into collapse. The engineers had scoffed at first. Silver was too soft, too unconventional for a high-performance engine. But Dr. Nguyen's discovery of a technical report on the alloy's forging process had lent credence to Lucas's idea. The report hinted at residual stresses from rapid cooling, a potential for microfractures that no scan could detect. Now, the moment of truth loomed. The bearing housing had been opened, the suspect bolt removed, and a custom-machined silver washer crafted to Lucas's exact specifications was ready to be installed. The lab's machine shop had worked with frantic precision, producing the delicate component in under an hour. It gleamed like a coin, a humble answer to a $3 billion problem. Dr. Carter. His hands steady, despite the weight of the moment, positioned the new bolt, now paired with the silver washer, into the rotor housing. The engineers flanked him, one holding a fiber optic camera, another a magnetic tray to catch the components. The camera's feed flickered on the large monitor, showing the pristine interior of the housing. Carter tightened the bolt, careful not to exceed the torque. Lucas had suggested a lower setting than the original specifications to avoid stressing the already fragile metal. The room held its breath as the final turn clicked into place. Maria's heart pounded. She saw her son not as a child, but as a force standing against a world that had dismissed them both. Alex, his face unreadable, watched the monitor, his mind wrestling with the possibility that a boy had outsmarted his entire team. "It's done," Carter said, stepping back, his voice low. "The washer's in place." Lucas nodded, his brown eyes calm but intense. "Run it," he said simply, "and keep it quiet." Dr. Nguyen gave a sharp nod to Carter, who moved to the control panel. The engineers braced themselves, their eyes flicking to the timer. They had seen this test too many times, watched the engine roar to life, only to choke at 120 seconds with a wail of failure. But this time felt different. The air was charged, not with dread, but with a fragile, almost sacred hope. Carter pressed the button, and the Elysium engine came alive. Its roar filled the lab, a deep, powerful hum that vibrated through the floor. The timer began to climb. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Lucas stood still, his eyes closed, his hands no longer touching the engine, but his senses attuned to its rhythm. He was listening, not just with his ears, but with his entire being, feeling for the discordant ping that had betrayed the machine's pain. The engineers watched their monitors' data stream scrolling in green, every metric stable. At 60 seconds, the room's tension tightened like a coiled spring. This was the danger zone where the harmonic collapse had always begun. At 90 seconds, Carter's voice broke the silence. Resonance holding at 99% efficiency. No anomalies. The engineers exchanged glances, their skepticism giving way to disbelief. Maria clutched her cleaning rag, tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to believe. But the fear of failure, of losing her job, her son's future, clawed at her. Alex's hands tightened into fists, a bead of sweat tracing his temple. He had gambled fortunes, but never on something as intangible as a child's intuition. At 110 seconds, the timer approached the critical mark. The engineers braced for the familiar wail, the shudder that would end it all. But it didn't come. The engine's hum remained steady, a perfect, unbroken song. 120 seconds. The room erupted in a collective gasp. The curse was broken. The timer climbed. 121, 122, 130. All systems stable. Carter announced, his voice cracking with emotion. Vibration profiles are clean. The washer, it's working. The engine roared on its power, no longer a prelude to failure, but a promise kept. At 180 seconds, Alex raised a hand. "Shut it down," he said, his voice hoarse. Carter complied, and the engine spun down, its hum fading into a contented silence. The lab was still for a moment, the only sound the soft ticking of cooling metal. Then chaos. The engineers burst into applause, some laughing, others wiping tears from exhausted eyes. They hugged each other, their relief a tangible force. 8 weeks of torment had ended not by their expertise, but by the insight of a boy who spoke the language of machines. Maria sank into a chair, her legs weak, her sobs silent but overwhelming. It wasn't just the engine's success, it was the sight of her son, her Lucas, standing tall in a world that had tried to crush them. Lucas, however, was calm, his small smile tinged with sadness. "It's not hurting anymore," he said softly, his hand brushing the engine's casing. "It's happy now." Dr. Newen approached Lucas, her tablet forgotten, her eyes bright with awe. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice gentle but urgent. "How did you know the silver would work?" Lucas thought for a moment, his mind drifting to Juan's garage, to the smell of oil and the warmth of his grandfather's voice. Grandpa Juan said sometimes the strongest fix isn't the hardest one. He said soft things can hold broken things together like a bandage. The silver takes the vibration and spreads it out so the crack doesn't grow. Gwen nodded, her mind racing. The boy was describing a principle of material damping, a concept buried in old engineering texts, forgotten in the age of computer models and perfect alloys. It was a masterclass delivered in a child's words. Alex stepped forward, his face a mask of conflicting emotions: shock, admiration, and something deeper, something unfamiliar. He knelt before Lucas, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "You did it," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "You actually did it." Lucas nodded, unfazed by the billionaire's gaze. It just needed someone to listen. Alex stood, turning to Maria, who was trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Delgado," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the lab, "I made a promise. $150 million if the engine was fixed. Your son has done the impossible. The money is yours." Maria shook her head, her voice breaking. "Sir, you don't have to. It was a joke. You were angry." Alex cut her off, his tone firm but stripped of its earlier cruelty. "It was no joke. A promise is a promise. My banker will contact you tomorrow. Get a lawyer, Mrs. Delgado. You'll need one." The room buzzed with murmurs, the engineers still processing the miracle they'd witnessed. But Dr. Nguyen wasn't done. She had been digging through Vanguard's archives during the test, her curiosity piqued by Lucas's reference to his grandfather. She approached Alex, her tablet displaying a scanned document from the 1970s. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice cutting through the celebration, "there's something you need to see." She handed him the tablet, and Alex's eyes scanned the page. It was a Navy report, yellowed with age, detailing an incident aboard the USS Enterprise in 1974. A fighter jet had suffered a catastrophic engine failure during a landing, its fuel line rupturing, threatening to engulf the deck in flames. A mechanic chief petty officer, Juan Delgado, had climbed into the burning engine compartment, armed only with a wrench and a fire extinguisher, and sealed the leak, saving the pilot and the crew. The pilot's name was Captain William Kane, Alex's father. Alex's face paled, his breath catching. He looked from the tablet to Lucas, then to Maria. "Your grandfather was Juan Delgado?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maria nodded, stunned. "Yes, sir. He never talked much about the Navy. He just said he fixed things." Alex's hands trembled as he set the tablet down. He walked to the lab's window, staring out at Seattle's skyline, his mind reeling. His father had spoken of the mechanic who saved his life, a man he'd tried to find after the war, to thank, to offer a share of the family business. But Juan had vanished into civilian life, leaving only a name and a debt unpaid. "My father owed his life to your grandfather," Alex said, turning back to Maria and Lucas. "He searched for him for years. He said, everything we have, Vanguard, this empire, exists because of that man." Maria's eyes filled with tears, the weight of her grandfather's quiet heroism settling over her. Lucas, sensing the shift, stepped closer to his mother, his small hand slipping into hers. "Grandpa Juan said the best fixes don't make noise," he said softly. "He said they just make things right." Alex looked at the boy, his arrogance crumbling. He had built his life on control, on the belief that money and credentials could solve any problem. But this child, armed with nothing but intuition and a mechanic's wisdom, had upended his world. The $150 million was no longer just a contract. It was a bridge to a past he hadn't known. He was part of a debt his family had carried for decades. The engineers, still buzzing with excitement, began recalibrating their sensors, eager to learn from Lucas's approach. Dr. Nguyen knelt beside him, her voice warm. "Lucas, your grandfather taught you something our computers couldn't. Would you show us how you listen?" Lucas nodded, his shy smile returning. "It's not hard," he said. "You just have to be quiet and feel the machine's heart." Maria watched her son, her fear giving way to a fierce, radiant pride. The lab, once a cold monument to failure, was now alive with possibility. But for Alex, the moment was more than a technical triumph. It was a reckoning. He had mocked a janitor, and her son used their vulnerability as a prop in his theater of power. Now he saw them not as furniture, but as people who had saved his legacy and connected him to a history he could never repay. As the lab buzzed around him, Alex felt a shift deep within a crack in his own hardened heart, beginning to heal. The Vanguard Technologies lab in Seattle, once a sterile shrine to ambition, hummed with a new energy. The Elysium engine, its titanium and cobalt alloy frame gleaming under the lab's bright lights, stood as a testament to a miracle. For the first time in 8 grueling weeks, it had run flawlessly, its roar a steady, triumphant song that had shattered the 120-second curse. The digital timer on the wall, now dark, had ticked past 3 minutes during the final test, a victory orchestrated by an 11-year-old boy named Lucas Delgado. The engineers, their faces still flushed with disbelief and relief, milled about the lab, recalibrating sensors and scribbling notes, their exhaustion replaced by a frenetic curiosity. Maria Delgado, Lucas's mother, stood near the engine, her Navy janitor's uniform a stark contrast to the high-tech chaos around her. Her hands trembled not from fear now, but from a profound, almost unbearable relief. The weight of hospital bills, the terror of her mother's illness, the constant grind of survival, all had been lifted in a single afternoon. Alexander Kane, the billionaire CEO of Vanguard, stood apart, his tailored suit slightly rumpled, his gray eyes fixed on the engine. The man who had built an empire on control and intimidation was unraveling his worldview, reshaped by a child's genius and a debt from the past. Dr. Clara Nguyen, the Department of Energy observer, was still at her console, her tablet filled with meticulous notes on Lucas's diagnosis and solution. The silver washer, a simple soft metal disc, had done what no supercomputer or PhD could. It had absorbed the destructive vibration of a micro-fissure in the rotor bearing, allowing the Elysium engine to sing its intended song. But Clara's focus had shifted. The Navy report she had uncovered, detailing how Juan Delgado, Lucas's grandfather, had saved Alex's father, Captain William Kane, in a fiery incident aboard the USS Enterprise in 1974, had added a layer of meaning to the day's events. It wasn't just about an engine anymore. It was about connections, debts, and the quiet heroism of those who history often overlooked. Clara approached Lucas, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sketching a diagram of the engine on a scrap of paper. "Lucas," she said, her voice warm but professional, "your grandfather's lessons. They're not just about machines, are they? They're about seeing what others miss." Lucas looked up, his brown eyes bright. "Grandpa Juan said machines are like people. They hide their hurts until you listen close." Maria overheard, her heart swelling. She had always known Lucas was special, his mind a spark that lit up their small apartment even on the darkest days. But seeing him here surrounded by engineers who now looked to him with awe was a revelation. She thought of Juan, his rough hands and gentle voice, teaching Lucas in their cramped garage. He had passed away 2 years ago, leaving behind a toolbox and a legacy of wisdom Maria hadn't fully understood until now. She wiped a tear from her cheek, her fear replaced by a fierce pride. But the moment was bittersweet. The $150 million Alex had promised, a sum so vast it felt like a fairy tale, came with a shadow. The public spectacle of Alex's bet broadcast on Vanguard's internal feed had leaked to the press. By morning, the story of a janitor's son outsmarting a billionaire's team would be splashed across headlines, and with it, scrutiny. Maria knew men like Alex didn't like being humbled, especially not in public. Alex, as if sensing her thoughts, approached her. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. "Mrs. Delgado," he said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "Your son has done more than fix an engine. He's exposed a flaw in how we think, how we work. That $150 million, it's yours as promised. My team will arrange the transfer tomorrow, but I owe you more than money." Maria shook her head, overwhelmed. "Sir, it's too much. You don't have to." Alex raised a hand, his tone firm but not unkind. "I do. A promise is a debt, and I pay my debts. But there's another debt, one my family has carried for decades." He glanced at Lucas, who was now showing his sketch to an engineer, explaining the vibration pattern with a child's clarity. "Your grandfather saved my father's life. Everything I have Vanguard this lab, my name, it exists because of Juan Delgado. I didn't know until today, but now I do, and I won't let that debt go unpaid." Maria's breath caught. She thought of Juan's humble life, his stories of the Navy told in fragments, always brushed off with a shrug. "He never said much about it," she whispered. "He just wanted to fix things." Alex nodded, his eyes distant. "My father spent years looking for him. He wanted to give him a share of the company, a piece of what we built. He called it his greatest regret, not finding Juan." He paused, his voice softening. "Your son has given me a chance to make that right." He turned to Dr. Nguyen, who was watching with her characteristic intensity. "Dr. Nguyen, you're my witness. Beyond the $150 million, I'm establishing the Juan Delgado Foundation, a scholarship program for kids like Lucas, kids with gifts the world might overlook. It starts with $50 million, and I'll match that annually. Mrs. Delgado, I'd like you to oversee it." Maria's knees buckled and she gripped the console for support. "Me?" she stammered. "I'm just a janitor." Alex shook his head, a rare smile touching his lips. "You're the mother of a genius and the granddaughter of a hero. You're not just anything." The engineers, overhearing, nodded in agreement, their earlier skepticism replaced by respect. Dr. Carter, still reeling from the test, approached Maria, his voice sheepish. "Mrs. Delgado, I owe you an apology. We should have listened sooner." Maria managed a small nod, her throat tight. The room, once a place of cold efficiency, felt warm, human, alive with possibility. But the story wasn't over. As the engineers began to disperse, Clara pulled Alex aside, her expression grim. "Mr. Kane, you need to see this." She showed him her tablet, now displaying a news alert. The headline read, "Billionaire, humiliated by janitor's son in 150 anti-bet." The article, based on leaked footage from the lab's internal feed, painted Alex as a callous tyrant who had mocked a struggling single mother only to be outdone by her child. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #LucasTheGenius and Vanguard Shame trending. Alex's face darkened, but not with anger. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of shame. He had used Maria and Lucas as pawns in his game, and now the world was watching. "This is going to be a PR nightmare," Clara said, her voice neutral but pointed. "You need to get ahead of it." Alex nodded, his mind racing. He had spent his life controlling narratives, but this one was slipping through his fingers. He called the room to attention, his voice steady but softer than usual. "Everyone, listen up. Today, Lucas Delgado did what we couldn't. He fixed the Elysium engine, but more than that, he taught us something. Genius doesn't come with a degree or a paycheck. It comes from listening, from seeing what others miss." He turned to Maria and Lucas. "I made a mistake today. I mocked you, Mrs. Delgado, and I was wrong. I'm sorry. That apology will be public on every platform by tonight." The room was silent, the engineers stunned by their boss's humility. Maria, tears streaming down her face, could only nod. Lucas, sensing the shift, tugged at her sleeve. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered. "He's trying to fix it like Grandpa Juan would." Over the next hour, the lab transformed into a classroom. Lucas, at Clara's urging, began explaining his process to the engineers. He spoke of vibrations as whispers of metal, as having memories, terms that echoed Juan's teachings but resonated with the team. They adjusted their sensors, recalibrating them to detect subtler frequencies inspired by Lucas's intuition. Dr. Carter, humbled but eager, asked Lucas to show him how to listen to the engine. Lucas placed Carter's hand on the casing, guiding him to feel the faint hum of a healthy machine. "It's like a heartbeat," Lucas said. "When it's happy, it's steady." Carter, his pride set aside, nodded a student to a child's wisdom. Alex watched from the sidelines, a stranger in his own domain. He thought of his father, Captain William Kane, whose stories of the Navy had shaped his childhood. William had spoken of Juan Delgado with reverence, a man who risked everything for a crew he barely knew. Alex had built Vanguard on the belief that he was the smartest man in any room. But now he saw the truth. His empire rested on the courage of others, on the quiet strength of people like Juan Maria and Lucas. He approached Maria, who was watching Lucas with a radiant smile. "Mrs. Delgado," he said, "there's one more thing. Your mother's medical care, every treatment, every bill, every debt, it's covered. Vanguard's executive health plan is yours, effective immediately." Maria's sob broke free, a sound of joy and release. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying a lifetime of struggle. "Thank you." As the lab quieted, Alex took Lucas and Maria to his office, a sleek space overlooking Seattle's Puget Sound. He sat across from them, not behind his desk, but in a simple chair. His tie loosened, his demeanor human. "Lucas," he said, "your grandfather saved my father, and today you saved my company. But more than that, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten: how to see people, not just problems." He pulled a framed photo from a drawer, an old image of a Navy crew aboard the USS Enterprise. He pointed to a young pilot, his father, and then to a man with steady eyes and oil-stained hands, Juan Delgado. "This is him." Alex said, his voice thick. Maria touched the glass, tears welling. "That's Grandpa," she said softly. Lucas leaned closer, his eyes wide. "He looks like he's listening to something." 6 months later, Vanguard Technologies was unrecognizable. The lab, once a cold monument to ego, was now a hub of collaboration, its culture reshaped by Lucas's lesson. Maria, no longer a janitor, was director of the Juan Delgado Foundation, identifying gifted children from underserved communities. Lucas, after school, consulted on Vanguard's toughest problems, teaching engineers to listen to machines. The Elysium engine powered the Horizon Initiative, its clean energy transforming cities. Alex, a changed man, led with a new humility. he had issued a public apology, not just to Maria, but to all who had been overlooked in his pursuit of power. The headlines had shifted now, celebrating Hat Lucas the Genius as a symbol of hope. One evening, Alex found Lucas sitting by the Elysium engine, its hum a quiet lullaby. "What do you hear now?" Alex asked, sitting beside him. Lucas smiled his hand on the metal. "It's happy," he said. "It's doing what it was meant to do." Alex looked at the boy, then at the engine, and felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The story wasn't about a bet or a machine. It was about broken things made whole, about debts repaid across generations, about a billionaire learning to listen. And in that quiet moment, Alex knew his heart, once as hard as the alloy in the engine, had found its own soft fix.